today the 6 liter is getting completely assembled. There are a bunch of BTR goodies going in this motor, so let's get started. The crank is fully installed and spinning great, so now I gotta work on the pistons. The other night my dad cleaned out all the ring grooves, so I'm running them through the ultrasonic cleaner one more time just to get all that last little bit of gunk. When assembling your rings, it's important to make sure your ring gap orientation is set up correctly. I like to have the piston with the directional marker facing upward, and then we're gonna drop in the expander ring and have the gap centered with the wrist pin. Then we'll take the lower oil ring and I'll go about an inch in one direction from the center of the expander ring and pop that in. Then take the upper oil ring and go about an inch in the other direction. We'll end up with lower oil ring, oil expander ring, upper oil ring. Then we'll take and flip it so that our directional marker is down, and we'll grab our lower compression ring. These are usually directional and they'll have some kind of marker like this little stamp to tell you which way is up. With these, I like to take and drop one end in the groove and then very carefully spiral it around. And then lift it so we do not scratch the piston. That will have lined up with the wrist pin. We'll flip to the other side, do the same thing with the upper compression ring. This one is not directional, but they have some kind of branding on them, and I've just been putting that up on all of these. So this piston is ready to make some power. That's done, so now it's time for what y'all came here for, the chop rod. This is a BTR red hot camshaft. It's nothing crazy, but it should give us good chop at idle and not take away too much of our torque. Now that our BTR red hot cam is installed, it's time to start putting on the timing set. This lower sprocket is pressed onto the crank. Some guys put these in an oven, heat them up, and slide them on there. I'm not the hugest fan of that, so we're gonna press it on, and I'm gonna show you how. To do this, you're gonna need a crank installation tool and your old timing gear, or something like it. Obviously, make sure both the new gear and the crank are free of debris. We'll slide the new gear on, lining it up with the keyway. We're gonna take our old gear and put it on backwards, and then take our installation tool and thread it in all the way. When you're tightening it up, just watch for the back side of the sprocket to touch the crank. I just realized this block is not drilled for a chain dampener. Looking through all the stuff from BTR, I don't think they sent me one, so I guess it's not an issue. Working on the heads now, dropped in the spring locators. Now we gotta install the valve seals. You can go and get one of those fancy tools, but all they do is locate on this edge. A 7/16 12-point socket fits perfectly over these valve seats. So just gonna line it up as best we can. Come in with the dead blow. We're not hitting it hard, we're just letting it do its thing. To assemble these, I'm setting the spring in the pocket and then taking the retainer and the valve locks and setting them on top of the spring. Then oil up the valve real good, stick that up from the bottom. All I'm doing is compressing the spring so the valve comes up through the center. As soon as the valve locks kind of drop in place, come back up, and they're ready to rock. For the rockers, I made a little die set for my arbor press to make the disassembly and reassembly of the trunnions a little bit easier. When installing the bearings, the lettering should be facing outward. The lower bearing is really straightforward to install. For the upper bearing, you insert the trunnion first, then bring the bearing over the top and press it together. Then we just drop on the washers and the C-clips. Moving on to the lifters, these are BTR LS7 style lifters. For lifter orientation, they have these oil feed holes. I've seen people say face them forward, face them backward. I've seen people that didn't care. My preference is to face them backwards because that's where the flow of oil comes from. I also have a new set of BTR lifter trays. If you're putting in new lifters, it's a good idea to put in lifter trays too. Brand new set of BTR head gaskets. Pay attention to the orientation on these. This hole is only on the backside, and that's what lets the coolant into the heads. You don't want to mess that up. You'll overheat immediately. The oil pump is obviously an important part that you don't want to fail, and its alignment is critical in the longevity of your pump. All you need are two 2/1000 feeler gauges. First things first, we gotta slide the pump on. The center gear does move a little bit, so it can be a little tricky to get started. There we go. Then take the 4 bolts and we're gonna run them in finger tight. Okay, with the bolts finger tight, we're gonna want the pump to have a little bit of wiggle. Now we're gonna pop off the faceplate. What we're trying to align is this outer pump gear with the housing. This process is real easy. We're just gonna take our shim and slide it in between the housing and the pump. We're gonna do one here and the other one down here. Now torque to 18 foot-pounds. You do not want to forget to pull these out. That would be a bad day. Then reinstall the faceplate and torque to 106 inch-pounds. Now we're done in the front, so it's time for the front cover. It's important that these covers are aligned so the seals actually do their job, and there are 2 tools to help with this. One simulates the oil pan, so the bottom of the cover is flush with the block, and the other goes around the crank. With both alignment tools on, we torque to 18 foot-pounds. The nice thing about this alignment tool is you can also use it to drive in your new seal. This cover gets bolted onto these studs. Okay, before we all go insane, that is not the oil pan that is gonna be going in the truck. There's a C5 oil pan on the motor that's in the truck, so when that motor comes out and this one comes off the run stand, I'm gonna swap the oil pans. If you like this oil auxiliary manifold, richardengineering.com. They also have them in red and silver. Okay, the last thing before she goes on the run stand is the balancer. Now this guy doesn't have a dowel pin or a keyway or anything, but we're gonna change that. I forgot to push record, so the pulley's on. So now, I'm gonna take the old crank pulley bolt, spin that guy on there. So now the torque spec for this is 250 foot-pounds to set the pulley. That sucks. So we're gonna do this first. Set that pulley in there a little bit. Now we're gonna take the pulley out, and I have this nifty little jig. This is from Summit, but there's a whole bunch of different brands out there. So what this is gonna do is drill to install a pin to keep the crank pulley from spinning. I'm having bad luck with the camera tonight. So I just drilled the crank and the balancer for this little 1/4 inch pin. This neat little jig helped me do that. So this goes, bolts up in, and it gives you a drill bushing to drill out and insert a little dowel pin. I definitely would recommend doing that if you're adding any power to your motor, because if you spin that pulley, your crank is junk.
Ready?
Yep.
More?
More. Right there. Well, that was the first time I got to use the gantry on that I-beam. That worked out great. So now, since the way my engine stand is set up, I couldn't get to anything on the back here. So now I have to put on the rear cover and the rear seal. One thing I forgot to talk about was the oil galley barbell. You can see where it sits on the back of the block. This barbell diverts the oil coming down your oil galley through your oil pump. The factory one is made of plastic and there's nothing necessarily wrong with the part, but this one from Improved Racing is aluminum and has O-rings on both ends of the barbell. If you have the rear cover off, it's something I would recommend swapping out. We got a starter bolted up in there. Here comes the flywheel. All right, 15, 37, 74. In a star pattern. Okay. The last piece of the puzzle. I know a bunch of you are going to ask, this is a small block bell housing from a boat, specifically a Merc Cruiser, and they will bolt right up to an LS. It's finally time to talk about the intake. This is a Trailblazer SS intake. You can also find them on a handful of GMT 900 trucks from I think it's 2011 to 2014. The original injectors in this motor were 38 pound/hour injectors. You can see the part number there. With the cam we put in this motor and where I plan to go with it one day, these were gonna be right on the ragged edge of being usable. So I upgraded to a set of GM Genuine, I believe they're AC Delco, 50 pound/hour injectors. These are pretty much the go-to injector if you're putting a bigger cam in an LS. When installing new injectors, I like to put just a little bit of oil on the O-ring. That oil really helps slide the new injector in. I'm gonna do the same thing with the oil on the intake. Just put a little bit on each of these bevels just to help slide everything in. Click and click. That right there is how you get an instant oil leak. I skipped over a few of the boring details for you, but the motor is on the run stand. I want to give a huge thank you to Brian Tooley Racing for sending everything I needed to put a cam in this motor. And their valve covers are looking awesome with those 6-liter truck coils on there. Make sure you hit that subscribe so you don't miss the next video. We're building a harness from scratch, tuning the factory computer, and firing this baby up.